Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Cassidy, for jointly bringing our attention to this. I recently helped to introduce the bipartisan Protecting and Transforming Cyber Healthcare, or PATCH Act, with my colleague, Senator Cassidy. And this legislation is aimed at helping protect patients from ransomware by implementing critical cybersecurity requirements for device manufacturers. And it would allow manufacturers to develop and maintain processes to update and patch devices throughout the life cycle. Mr. Corman, you anticipated my first question in your testimony when you were talking, and in your answer to a previous question, when you're talking about the significant amount of research that shows how ransomware attacks constrain hospitals and ICUs, et cetera, leading to excess deaths. So I want to take my question in a slightly different direction because while I'm really proud to sponsor this legislation, it always helps me to get a more granular view of what devices are at risk of being hacked or being manipulated. You showed us a pacemaker. You talked about insulin pumps. I'm curious to know whether part of our strategy might be to make smart devices into dumb devices. We famously have a colleague on the Democratic side of the aisle who uses his flip phone just because it's safer than our iPhones and Androids. But what about diagnostic and treatment devices in hospitals? Can they be manipulated? What about, anyways, I open that up and give us some more granular examples and whether bringing some of those offline might be actually more helpful to good patient outcomes.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. In the PATCH Act, I should mention, as I prepared my remarks, I called some of the worst victims during the pandemic and said, what are your top 3 to 5 things you'd want Congress to know? And one of the biggest victims said, all 5 of my top 5 are I need the PATCH Act. His point was they never want what happened to them to ever happen again, and as they've taken a much closer look at their attack surface and their exposures, it's the unsupported software, the hard-coded passwords, the supply chain of devices, whether they be medical or just normal technology. He can't defend an indefensible kingdom, so he wanted me to express his, I think he said, I'm dying of thirst, and that is the water I need. To your more specific question, pretty much all technologies, even 5 years ago, I want to mark Thursday was the 5-year anniversary of WannaCry, the most devastating attack on healthcare in the world at the time. It mostly hit the UK. I remember it because we were also issuing our report to Congress for our 405C on the same day, and it got delayed by 3 weeks. In that, we pointed out that a typical medical technology has over 1,000 known vulnerabilities, or CVEs, and it only takes one. During the pandemic, we saw even different types of technologies that could bring down either patient care in an acute sense. One was a radiation delivery machine that had a heavy dependence on the cloud. So you have this incredible multi-million-dollar expensive piece of gear that does its function but can't calculate how and where to precisely deliver radiation. So for several weeks, you could not deliver time-sensitive cancer treatment. So the Internet of Medical Things is going to be everywhere. It's our electronic medical records. I try to focus people in a practical sense, moving more quickly to some of the things later in my testimony, these pragmatic security steps. These are the most dangerous practices. Instead of just referring to best practices, I got CISA to publish something called CISA.gov bad practices. There are currently 3. I think there's about to be a 4th. But these are the use of unsupported and end-of-life software in service of national critical functions and critical infrastructure is dangerous. Especially egregious for internet-facing. So I try to focus these target-rich cyberpoor on their internet attack surface, the things reachable from the outside. And I look for things like unsupported software, hard-coded fixed passwords, and that's really the place to start. This should start to become the definition of negligence.
Thank you. I fear I'm not going to get a full